You guys just keep asking for the more Reddit stories. So, I'm ready with the new tale. Let's read some cool, interesting cheating wife Reddit stories. And guys, I'm trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So please subscribe and let's get straight into this one.
I still remember the day my wife Sarah signed up at that fancy new gym. We'd both been stuck in our routines, and she was determined to get in better shape. So when she excitedly showed me the gym's website, with its glossy images of pristine workout spaces, I didn't hesitate. She needed a break from her busy work schedule, and I figured this would be good for her. Little did I know how much that choice would shake up our entire world. The first few weeks seemed normal enough. She'd come home a bit more tired than usual, but I attributed that to her body adjusting to the workouts. She'd gush about her trainer Tyler, every now and then, telling me about his fitness tips and the killer workouts he had her doing. I chalked it up to enthusiasm. I mean, a good trainer is supposed to motivate you, right? But as the weeks went by, her enthusiasm turned into something else. I started noticing small changes. Her phone, which she used to leave lying around, was suddenly glued to her side. She'd get texts late into the night, and if I asked, she'd say it was just gym buddies chatting. She was home less and less, going to the gym not just in the evenings, but on weekends too. When I'd bring it up, she'd laugh it off, saying she was finally committed to a healthy lifestyle. One day, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to surprise her at the gym, thinking it would be a sweet gesture to show her I cared about her newfound passion. As I walked through the doors, the smell of disinfectant and the sound of weights clinking filled the air. I wandered through the cardio area, then past the weight racks, but I didn't see her. When I asked the front desk attendant, he pointed me toward the private training rooms, saying that's where Sarah and Tyler usually trained. And that's when I saw them, Sarah and Tyler, in a private corner, both laughing in a way that seemed a bit too familiar. There was something in the way he looked at her, the way her hand lingered on his arm, and the blush on her face. They hadn't noticed me yet, and I felt frozen, trying to convince myself I was misreading it all. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. After that day at the gym, I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling gnawing at me. Maybe it was just me overthinking things. I mean, she deserved to have fun, right? But as the days passed, it became impossible to ignore the changes in Sarah. She seemed distant. Her laughter wasn't the carefree sound it used to be, and she seemed to spend more time glued to her phone than talking to me. Even on our date nights, she was distracted, glancing at her screen every few minutes. One evening, I brought it up casually, hoping she'd laugh it off and put my mind at ease. "You and Tyler sure spend a lot of time together," I said, half joking. Sarah shot me a look, her smile fading as she rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Jake. He's my trainer. He's supposed to help me stay motivated. Isn't that what you wanted?" "Of course, it's just..." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I feel like I barely see you anymore. It's like you're more married to the gym than to me." She sighed, crossing her arms defensively. "You know, Jake, I'm finally doing something for myself. I thought you'd be supportive, not insecure." That hit me hard. Insecure? I tried to shake it off, but the word echoed in my mind. Maybe I was insecure. Maybe I was just paranoid. But late that night, lying next to her as she fell asleep, I couldn't stop the unsettling thoughts that crowded my mind. Every message alert on her phone, every time she mentioned Tyler, felt like a sting. A week later, I convinced myself to swing by the gym after work. This time, I didn't go in, just parked outside, watching as people came and went, hoping for some sign that would make me feel foolish for ever doubting her. And then, there she was, heading toward the exit with Tyler. They laughed as they walked out together, her hand casually grazing his arm. They stood close, their voices muffled, but the body language was unmistakable. My heart pounded as they walked to the far end of the parking lot, chatting under the dim streetlight. I saw him lean in, his face inches from hers, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was all just an innocent moment between trainer and client. Then she leaned in closer, her smile widening as she laughed at something he whispered. And just as I was convincing myself I was seeing things, they hugged, her arms lingering around his neck just a little too long. I sat there frozen, a mix of disbelief and dread building up inside me. I felt like I'd stumbled upon a secret I wasn't supposed to see, a truth I wasn't prepared to face. After that night in the parking lot, I could barely sleep. I kept replaying the moment I'd seen them together, searching for some rational explanation. Maybe I was blowing it out of proportion. Maybe that hug had been nothing more than a friendly gesture. But the gnawing doubt wouldn't leave me. And it wasn't long before I found myself looking for proof, hoping to either confirm my suspicion or, better yet, prove myself wrong. A few days later, I waited until Sarah was in the shower and then grabbed her phone. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages, feeling like a stranger rifling through someone else's life. There were dozens of messages from Tyler. Most were innocent on the surface, workout plans, motivational pep talks, but there were others that made my stomach drop. Messages like, "Can't wait for our session tomorrow. Loved seeing you today. Wow, tonight was fun. Let's make it a habit." And the worst one, sent just last night. "I miss you already." My heart pounded as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I miss you already. How could he say that if all they had was a trainer-client relationship? And why hadn't she deleted the messages? I wanted to believe there was some logical explanation, but the truth was staring me right in the face. When she came out of the shower, I put the phone back on the dresser and tried to act normal. Though every bone in my body was tense with anger and hurt, she came over to me, kissed my cheek, and started talking about her day, as if nothing was wrong. I nodded along, my mind spinning with questions, wondering if I should confront her now or wait until I had more answers. Later that night, when she was asleep, I took my phone and searched the gym's schedule, finding out that Tyler worked the late shift the next day. I decided I'd go to the gym and confront him directly, see if he'd admit to anything, maybe get him to tell me what was really going on between them. The next evening, I walked into the gym, my heart pounding, fists clenched, scanning the room until I spotted him in the back, adjusting weights on a rack. Taking a deep breath, I made my way over, forcing myself to stay calm. "Hey, Tyler," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked up, surprised, giving me a polite nod. "Oh, hey, Jake. How's it going, man?" I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You tell me. You and Sarah seem to be spending a lot of time together." He smirked, leaning casually against the weights, but there was something cold in his eyes. "Well, that's kind of my job, isn't it? Helping her reach her goals?" "Cut the crap," I said, voice tight. "I saw the messages, Tyler, the ones you've been sending her. I miss you already. What the hell is that about?" He didn't even flinch. In fact, he seemed almost amused, like he'd expected this confrontation. "Look, Jake," he said, voice low and condescending. "Sarah's been unhappy for a while. I'm just giving her the attention she deserves." His words felt like a punch to the gut. I had no response, only a storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion, flooding my mind. And in that split second, I realized the truth I'd been trying so hard to ignore. After my encounter with Tyler, I drove home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. His smug, dismissive attitude echoed in my head. The nerve of him, standing there, saying he was giving her the attention she deserved. It took every ounce of self-control not to knock that smirk off his face right then and there. I didn't want to explode in the middle of the gym. I wanted answers from her. When I got home, Sarah was in the living room, her face lit by the glow of her phone. She looked up, and I could see the surprise in her eyes when she saw me come in. I hadn't told her I'd be home early. "Jake, hey, you're home," she said, tucking her phone away quickly, like a kid caught with their hand in the cookie jar. I was just about to make dinner." I couldn't hold back anymore. The frustration, the anger, and the hurt that had been bubbling under the surface all came rushing up at once. "Forget dinner, Sarah. We need to talk." She blinked, her smile fading. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I scoffed, trying to steady myself. "You tell me, Sarah. You and Tyler have gotten pretty close, haven't you?" Her face flushed, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, but she quickly covered it up, rolling her eyes as if I was being ridiculous. "Oh, come on, Jake. Tyler's my trainer. I already told you that. You're reading way too much into this." I took a step closer, staring her down. "No, Sarah, don't lie to me. I saw the messages. I saw how he acts around you, and I talked to him tonight. He said he's giving you the attention you deserve. What does that even mean?" Her face paled, and she took a step back, crossing her arms defensively. "You talked to Tyler?" "Yeah, I did, and he made it pretty clear that this isn't just a trainer-client thing." My voice was shaking now, a mix of anger and hurt that I could barely keep contained. "You think I don't see how you are around him? The late nights, the constant texting, the fact that you barely even look at me anymore." She looked away, staring at the floor as if the truth were written there. Her silence was louder than any confession she could have given me. "Tell me the truth, Sarah," I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. "Are you cheating on me with him?" She hesitated, biting her lip. And then finally, She looked up, her eyes shining with tears. Jake, I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. The words hung in the air, and I felt my heart shatter. Hearing her admit it was like a punch to the chest. I stood there, numb, trying to process the weight of her words, but the betrayal washed over me like a tidal wave. When? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She wiped a tear away, looking anywhere but at me. It started a few months ago. We'd spent so much time together and he made me feel special again, Jake. I know that sounds horrible, but you and I, everything felt so routine. Routine? I echoed, feeling the anger bubble up again. So what? This is my fault now, because our marriage wasn't exciting enough? She shook her head, her face a mix of regret and frustration. No, it's not like that. I lost myself somewhere along the way, Jake. Tyler was there, and he noticed me. He made me feel wanted again. I know that doesn't excuse it, but it just happened. I ran a hand over my face, trying to calm the storm inside me. So while I'm sitting here, working hard, trying to make sure we have a good life, you're off. What? Sneaking around with your trainer, throwing away everything we've built? She flinched, and for the first time, I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Jake. I never wanted to hurt you. I don't even know what I was thinking. That's just it, Sarah. You weren't thinking, I said, my voice breaking. You made a choice, over and over again. Every time you sent a message, every time you went to see him, you chose him. And now, you're sorry. She opened her mouth to respond, but I raised a hand, stopping her. Don't. I don't want to hear excuses. I just need to know one thing. Are you still in love with him? She looked down, silent. And that was my answer. A long, tense silence filled the room, each second stretching out painfully. Finally, I took a deep breath, my mind made up. I think you should leave, Sarah. I can't do this anymore. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, walking past me and heading for the bedroom. I listened as she packed a bag, and minutes later, I heard the front door close behind her. I sank onto the couch, feeling an emptiness settle in that I hadn't felt before. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. Anger, sadness, disbelief. Friends and family called, offering support, but I kept my distance, needing time to process everything. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the gym, not with the memories of what I'd discovered there. I spent nights awake, wrestling with questions that had no answers, wondering where it had all gone wrong. Over time, the pain dulled. I went through the motions, focusing on work, reconnecting with old friends, finding ways to fill the silence. It took months, but slowly, I found pieces of myself I'd forgotten. I rebuilt, day by day, and while the wound was still there, I realized I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. As for Sarah, I don't know where she ended up. We filed for divorce quietly, each of us too exhausted to fight anymore. I heard she'd left the city not long after, and though part of me wanted to confront Tyler one last time, I knew it wouldn't change anything. In the end, I walked away, carrying my lessons and scars, but determined to start over. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came next.
I never thought my life would take such a sharp turn. I remember a time when everything felt stable, unshakable even. My wife Laura and I had been together for almost 12 years. We had our ups and downs, sure, but every couple does, right? Or so I thought. It was last fall when I started noticing subtle changes. At first, it was easy to dismiss. She'd been staying late at work more often, which I figured was just the usual year-end rush. She's a project manager at an advertising agency, and every year she's swamped with client deadlines around that time. I didn't question it, not until things started piling up in ways that didn't add up. We'd always been close, talking about our days over dinner, sharing little details, but she became guarded. She'd leave her phone face down, silencing notifications with an awkward chuckle, saying it was just work stuff. Then there was the distance, not just physically, but in every sense. Even when we were together, she felt miles away. She stopped laughing at my jokes, became less interested in the plans I'd suggest, and always had some excuse to keep us from spending quality time together. It felt like I was losing her, piece by piece. One evening, I decided to surprise her at work, hoping maybe she just needed a reminder that I was still here, still in love with her. But when I arrived, her coworkers told me she had left hours ago. They looked confused when I mentioned she'd been working late. It felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I drove around aimlessly, trying to make sense of it. I wanted to ask her, to confront her, but how could I? If I was wrong, I'd sound paranoid. insecure, but if I was right, I wasn't ready for what that might mean. For the next few weeks, I watched her. I know it sounds obsessive, but I felt like I had no choice. There were too many small, unsettling details I couldn't ignore. She'd come home later, sometimes with the faintest trace of cologne that wasn't mine. When I'd ask about her day, she'd be vague, saying she'd been meeting clients or handling agency issues. But her eyes, something was missing. Finally, on a chilly Friday night, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. She'd left it unlocked on the counter, and before I could talk myself out of it, I found myself scrolling through her messages, my heart pounding in my chest. What I found wasn't explicit, but it was enough. There were messages from someone named Jay. Conversations filled with inside jokes, plans for lunches, even a few late-night chats where she'd talk about feeling free and excited. I could hardly breathe. The messages haunted me for days. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. It felt like my mind was stuck on repeat, going over every word, every emoji, every little hint that Laura had been pulling away from me while leaning closer to someone else. I didn't know who Jay was or how long this had been going on, but I knew I had to find out. On Monday, I couldn't focus at work. I was just going through the motions, counting down the minutes until I could go home and see her, maybe even get the nerve to confront her. But when I got home, she wasn't there. Laura had left a quick note on the counter, something about a work dinner with the new clients her agency had taken on. It was vague, like so many of her excuses had been lately. Instead of waiting, I decided to find out for myself what was really going on. I knew where her office was hosting the dinner, a small, high-end restaurant downtown that she'd mentioned a few times before. I figured if I could see her there, maybe catch her alone, I might get the chance to talk to her. Or maybe I'd see something that could give me answers without needing to ask. When I arrived at the restaurant, I parked across the street, hidden by a row of trees. My heart raced as I scanned the windows, looking for her. About 20 minutes later, I saw her walk in, but she wasn't alone. She was with him. There he was. Jay, I assumed. Tall, dark hair, wearing a well-fitted suit. He had that kind of confidence that made him seem larger than life, the kind that radiated and made everyone else fade into the background. Laura looked different with him. She was laughing, her eyes bright. Her face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. They didn't look like colleagues. They looked like a couple. And as I watched, he leaned in closer, whispering something in her ear that made her smile in a way she hadn't smiled with me in months. I sat there, frozen, as I watched them. They moved through the meal like they'd done this 100 times before. I felt like an outsider looking in on something I was never supposed to see. I wanted to burst through the doors, to confront her, to scream at both of them. But I stayed in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answered. Eventually, they left together, walking side by side out of the restaurant and down the street, lost in conversation, oblivious to the world around them. I couldn't bring myself to follow them. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the spot where they'd disappeared, wondering how everything had come to this. It was almost midnight when I finally drove home, numb and unsure of what to do next. When Laura came home later, she slipped into bed beside me without a word. I lay there, wide awake, feeling the bed sink as she settled in next to me. She smelled faintly of wine and that same cologne I'd caught before. I couldn't move, couldn't even look at her. All I could do was lie there, thinking about everything I'd just witnessed. The next morning, I decided it was time to talk to her. No more waiting, no more second-guessing. Whatever was going on between us, I had to face it head-on. The morning felt different, thick with tension. Laura was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, casually sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone as if everything was normal. I stood there for a second, watching her, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the person I saw last night. My chest tightened, a mix of anger, hurt, and confusion swirling together. "Laura," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, surprised by my tone. "Yeah?" "We need to talk." I could feel my throat tighten, my pulse racing. I had no idea where to start or how much to say. I only knew I couldn't hold this in any longer. Her expression shifted, a flicker of something. Was it guilt? She set her coffee down and nodded, pulling out a chair across from me at the kitchen table. "What's going on with us?" I asked. I could barely look at her, focusing instead on the small crack in the table, tracing its edge with my finger. "Lately, you've been different, distant, and I can't ignore it anymore." She looked away, her fingers fidgeting with her phone, her usual calm demeanor slipping. "It's just work stress, Jake. Things have been crazy. And I've been putting in more hours than usual. I didn't mean to make you feel like I was distant. Her voice was low, guarded, but she wouldn't look me in the eye. Work, huh? I let out a humorless laugh, my voice colder than I'd intended. So that's what last night was? Work? She froze, her face losing color. What do you mean? Her words were slow, cautious. I went by the restaurant, Laura. I saw you with him. I swallowed, forcing down the bitterness rising in my throat. The way you looked at him, that wasn't just work. I could feel my anger spilling over, no longer contained. She sat there, stunned, her face a mix of shock and shame. Jake, it's not what you think. Her voice was barely a whisper. Oh, really? So explain it to me. My words were sharp, and I could see them hit her like a slap. For a long moment she was silent, staring down at her hands. Finally she sighed, her shoulders slumping. His name is Jason. He's someone I met at work. We've been spending a lot of time together, and yes, we got close. Closer than we should have. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. But it wasn't supposed to be anything serious, Jake. I was just, I don't know, lonely. Lonely? I repeated, the word stinging. So you find someone else? Someone who just happens to make you feel a little more alive? She reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine. Jake, please. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was just a stupid mistake, one I regret. I pulled my hand back, feeling the anger surge through me. A mistake? Laura, this wasn't some one-time thing. This is months of lying, sneaking around behind my back. You made choices every day to hide this from me. That's not a mistake. That's betrayal. Her face crumpled, a tear slipping down her cheek. I'm so sorry, Jake. I should have told you when I started feeling whatever I was feeling, but I didn't know how, and by the time I realized it was wrong, it was too late. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did, but the betrayal was too raw, too deep. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice cold and detached. She hesitated. A few months since the fall. My heart sank, remembering all those months of late nights, her changed demeanor, the times I'd tried to reach out to her only to be met with silence. So what now, Laura? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Where does this leave us? She looked down, her fingers twisting nervously. I don't know, Jake. I don't know if we can fix this, but I want to try. I don't want to lose you. I never wanted that. But I didn't respond because deep down I wasn't sure if I could try. Days passed in a blur. Every time I looked at Laura, I felt like I was seeing a stranger. She was there, moving around the house, going through the motions of our life together, but everything felt off-kilter, broken. We tried to keep things civil, not for the sake of any kids, since we didn't have any, but just to avoid the screaming matches I felt bubbling up inside me whenever we were alone. I couldn't trust myself to stay calm. The anger was too raw. But one night, after another long, tense silence over dinner, I found myself staring at her, wondering how we'd ended up here. She looked worn out, guilty, barely touching her food. I could tell she'd been struggling, but a part of me couldn't sympathize. She'd done this. She'd let Jason into her life, knowing what it would do to us, and she'd still chosen him. I need answers, Laura, I said, breaking the silence. My voice was firm, controlled. You say you want to make this work, but I can't move forward until I understand. Until I know why this happened. She put down her fork, her hands trembling slightly. I know, and you deserve that. She looked up, a sadness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. I guess I felt like something was missing, Jake. We'd fallen into a routine, and somewhere along the way I lost myself. When I met Jason, it felt like a spark, something I hadn't felt in years. I felt the sting of her words, the implication that whatever she was missing, she hadn't found it with me. So what? You needed someone else to feel alive? To feel valued? Her eyes filled with tears. It sounds terrible, I know. And maybe it was selfish, but I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I just wanted to feel something different. Something exciting. I swallowed hard, the bitterness thick in my throat. Do you love him? She hesitated, and the pause was like a knife twisting in my gut. No, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I don't love him, Jake. I never loved him. It was just an escape. An escape, I repeated, trying to wrap my mind around it. So while I was here waiting up for you, trusting you, you were off with him, escaping? I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Do you even realize what that feels like? She nodded, wiping her eyes. I can only imagine, Jake. And I'll never be able to make it right, I know that. But if you can just give me a chance, I swear, I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to take her words and let them heal the wounds she'd left. But I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of my mind, the one that kept whispering, "How can you trust her again?" But I realized that I needed more than just words to decide. If you want this to work, Laura, you're going to have to cut him off completely. No contact, none. She nodded immediately, relief flooding her face. Done. I'll delete his number, block him on everything. You have my word, Jake. I want to rebuild what we had, more than anything. A part of me softened, seeing her willingness to try, to make amends. But I knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't sure if love alone would be enough to carry us through the damage. The following weeks were an emotional minefield. Laura cut all ties with Jason. I made sure of that, even went through her phone to confirm he was blocked on every platform. She accepted it without argument, doing everything she could to prove she was committed to repairing what was left of our marriage. She'd leave little notes around the house, words of apology, and promises to rebuild my trust. She was affectionate, attentive, even suggesting we go to counseling together. But no matter what she did, I felt hollow. The trust that had once bound us together was gone, and I couldn't shake the constant questions. Every time her phone buzzed, every time she was late from work, even by a few minutes, my mind spiraled into suspicion. It felt like I was a stranger in my own home, watching every move she made, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman I'd once known. One evening, I came home late after grabbing a drink with a few friends. I opened the door to find Laura sitting on the living room couch, staring down at her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger. She looked up when she heard me come in, her eyes tired, the sadness etched deep into her face. "Jake," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how much longer we can keep doing this." I dropped my keys on the counter, feeling the weight of her words settle heavily in the room. "What are you saying, Laura?" She sighed, her eyes brimming with tears. I thought if I tried hard enough, if I showed you how sorry I was, maybe you'd forgive me. Maybe we'd find a way back to what we had, but it feels like I'm only hurting you more by staying. I can see it in your eyes every time you look at me. You're holding on to so much pain, and I'm the one who put it there." I sat down across from her, exhausted, my heart heavy with the truth we both knew but hadn't said aloud. "You're right," I admitted, my voice shaky. "I don't know how to let it go. No matter how hard I try, I can't forget what you did. I can't stop seeing you with him every time I close my eyes." A tear rolled down her cheek and she quickly wiped it away, nodding. "I understand, Jake. I hate myself for what I did to us, for taking us down this path. But if letting go is the only way for you to heal, maybe it's what we have to do." We sat in silence, the reality settling between us. It felt surreal, like this wasn't how our story was supposed to end. And yet, it was the only ending that made sense. The next morning, we started discussing the logistics. Who would stay in the house, what we'd do with our shared finances, how we'd handle breaking the news to family and friends. We were calm, almost businesslike about it, and yet I could feel the sadness clinging to every word. It was like saying goodbye to a life we'd spent over a decade building together, one memory at a time. A week later, Laura packed her things and moved out. Watching her go was one of the hardest moments of my life. She paused at the door, her hand lingering on the handle, as if she might turn back, as if she wanted one last chance to say something that could change it all. But instead she just looked at me, her eyes full of the regret that couldn't change a thing. "I'll always love you, Jake. I just wish I'd never hurt you the way I did." With that, she was gone. The house was unbearably quiet after she left, the silence thick and unyielding. I wandered from the room to room, trying to make sense of a home that no longer felt like mine. Her absence was everywhere, and it hurt, but there was also a strange sense of relief, of knowing that the healing could finally begin. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. I threw myself into work, reconnected with friends, and started finding pieces of myself that had been buried under years of routine and complacency. Over time, the pain dulled, the memories faded, and I began to feel like myself again, or at least some new version of myself who had survived this storm. Years later, I ran into Laura at a mutual friend's wedding. She was there with a date. Someone who looked kind. Someone who made her laugh in that carefree way she'd once laughed with me. We exchanged polite smiles, shared a few words, and then went our separate ways. It was in that moment that I realized I'd finally let go. The anger, the resentment, they were just memories now. Remnants of a life that had shaped me, but no longer defined me. I knew I'd be okay. I'd learned to trust again, to love again, even if it meant taking things one day at a time. And as I watched her from across the room, I silently wished her well, knowing that maybe, just maybe, we'd both found the peace we'd been searching for all along.
I never thought I'd be the guy hiding in a closet of all things. But there I was, crouched in the cramped space, heart racing as I waited to see if my suspicions about my wife Laura were really true. Let me start from the beginning, though, because things didn't just lead to that closet overnight. It all started innocently enough, I thought, with just a couple of unexplained changes in Laura's behavior. We'd been married for 7 years, and while we weren't always in the honeymoon phase, I thought we were still good, solid even. But for the past few months, I had started to feel like a ghost in my own home. Laura's usual warmth had turned into polite, distant interactions, and her laughter, which used to fill the house, had grown quieter. I chalked it up to stress from her new project at work. But little by little, strange patterns emerged. There was one night in particular that set off alarm bells in my head. We were at my best friend Connor's house celebrating his birthday. Connor had been my buddy since college. We had practically grown up together. He was there through everything, through my courtship with Laura, our wedding, even the night we celebrated finding out we were going to be parents, though that joy was cut short by a miscarriage that nearly broke us. If there was anyone I trusted completely, it was him. As the night went on, I noticed Laura and Connor chatting in the corner. Nothing odd about it. He was practically family. But it was the way she was looking at him, the way she leaned in a little too close, her hand lightly brushing his arm as they laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. My gut twisted, but I forced myself to ignore it. I mean, this was Connor. I must have been imagining things, right? But that look stayed with me, gnawing at my mind. The doubts started building, small things stacking up. Laura's sudden work meetings that ran late, the messages she shielded on her phone, the time she would laugh quietly at her screen and refuse to share what was so funny. Each incident was minor, but collectively they screamed something wasn't right. After that night at Connor's birthday, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. I'd never been the jealous type, but it was as if I had suddenly developed a sixth sense, warning me of a betrayal that my mind refused to accept. I wanted so badly to be wrong. For a few days, I tried to talk myself out of it. I told myself that maybe I was overreacting. But every time Laura glanced at her phone with that secretive smile or laughed at a message she didn't want me to see, my gut would twist tighter. One day, I worked up the nerve to ask her about her late nights. "Hey, you've been working late a lot," I started, trying to sound casual. "Everything okay?" She looked up, a flicker of something, panic maybe, crossing her face before she forced a smile. "Yeah, just the usual workload," she replied, a little too quickly. "Why, you think I'm up to something?" She chuckled, but her eyes were guarded. I forced myself to laugh along with her. "Nah, just making sure you're not working too hard." She seemed to buy it, going back to whatever message she was typing on her phone. But that moment stayed with me, raising my suspicions even more. That night, as she fell asleep beside me, I tried to convince myself I was imagining it all. But when I glanced over at her phone lying on the bedside table, the thought crossed my mind, if there was nothing going on, why would she be hiding it? I knew her passcode. It was my birthday. And I told myself that I'd just check, just to ease my mind. But when I reached over, her phone suddenly lit up with a new message notification from Connor. The words blurred in my vision as my heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't bring myself to look at it, couldn't bring myself to open Pandora's box. Instead, I placed her phone back as quietly as I could, rolling over to face the wall as a million questions circled in my head. What could Connor be texting her about this late at night? Had I misread their closeness? Or was I seeing the beginning of something that would tear my life apart? Every suspicion I'd shoved down came crashing back. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, my mind spiraling, dread gripping me as I realized I might be on the edge of discovering something terrible. After that sleepless night, I was no closer to any answers, but my resolve had hardened. I needed to know the truth even if it destroyed me. I began observing everything Laura did, every little thing she said. I hated myself for it, feeling like I was losing my mind, becoming some paranoid version of the man I used to be. But if there was any chance she was cheating on me, and with Connor of all people, I had to find out. Days went by, and each one brought another little clue, some new breadcrumb that confirmed my worst fears. Lara would say she was running errands, but would come home with nothing to show for it. Her phone was always by her side, and she never left it unattended anymore. One night I woke up to find her sneaking out of our room to make a call in the living room. When I asked her about it the next day, she shrugged it off, saying she didn't want to wake me up. It felt like she was slipping away from me piece by piece, and every conversation felt like a test of my sanity. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed concrete proof. Confronting her without it could ruin everything if I was wrong. So I devised a plan. The next Saturday, I casually mentioned to Lara that I'd be busy the following weekend. I'd made up a story about a last-minute work event that required me to travel overnight. I wanted to see her reaction, to see if she would take the opportunity. And the strangest thing happened. She didn't look disappointed. She barely reacted at all. In fact, she simply nodded and went on scrolling through her phone as if I hadn't just told her I'd be away. That look sealed it for me. I didn't actually go on the trip, of course. I told her I'd be leaving Friday night and would be back Sunday afternoon. But when Friday evening came, I drove my car down the block, parked it out of sight, and called a cab back home. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and adrenaline as I hid near our house, watching, waiting. Hours passed with no sign of anything unusual. I was starting to feel like a fool, paranoid and embarrassed, when I saw her walk outside, phone pressed to her ear. I crept closer, listening as she talked quietly. "Yeah, he's gone." "No, come over whenever. I'm ready." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart sank as I realized what I had to do. That night, I called Connor, acting as if I was checking in before my trip. I faked some small talk, then mentioned, "Hey, it's been a while since we all hung out. Why don't you invite Lara over tomorrow? Just tell her you're bored and see if she comes over." The plan was set. The next day, I would be in Connor's closet, hiding like a damn spy. If Lara came over to his place, I'd have all the proof I needed. I barely slept that night, going over every possible outcome, wondering if I could even handle the truth if it confirmed my worst fears. The next day felt like it moved in slow motion. I left the house as though I were heading out of town, my stomach churning, but I circled back after a few hours. I parked a block from Connor's place and walked the rest of the way, heart pounding in my ears. It was almost dark by the time I crept around to the back of his house, slipped through the back door he'd left unlocked, and made my way to his bedroom closet. Hiding in there, time seemed to stand still. My mind went over every memory I had of Lara and Connor, piecing together every conversation, every little interaction I'd dismissed. I told myself again and again that maybe I was wrong, that maybe she wouldn't show up. But deep down, I knew. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the faint sound of the door unlocking, followed by 2 sets of footsteps. The closet door was cracked open just enough for me to see into the room. I held my breath as they walked in, laughing softly. Lara and Connor together. They didn't waste any time. Connor closed the door behind them, and I saw Lara's hand slide up his chest as he pulled her closer. It was like a punch to the gut watching her with him, my best friend, like they'd done this 1,000 times. The way they looked at each other, the ease in their movements, the way she smiled at him in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months, it all shattered me. I wanted to burst out of the closet and confront them then and there, my fists clenched, rage boiling up inside of me. But something held me back. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. as if watching it a second longer might change the reality of it all. My heart pounded painfully as I stayed frozen, watching in disbelief as they fell onto the bed. Their voices lowered to whispers, but one line slipped out clearly, slicing through me like a blade. "I can't believe we've kept this a secret from him for so long," she said, her voice soft and full of something that sounded dangerously close to affection. I don't remember leaving Connor's house. One moment I was crouched in the closet, and the next I was out in the cold night air, the sounds of their laughter ringing in my ears. It felt surreal, like I was floating outside my own body, watching my life crack and fall apart from a distance. I walked home in a daze, my mind playing the same images over and over, each one stabbing deeper than the last. Every step I took felt heavier, but by the time I reached our front door, a steely resolve had settled over me. When I walked in, the house was dark and silent. I could tell she wasn't home yet. I had a while to wait. I sat on the couch, staring at the clock, watching the minutes tick by as the anger within me grew, turning from despair into something harder, something stronger. By the time I heard her car pull into the driveway, I was ready. The door opened and Laura stepped inside, oblivious, humming softly as she took off her coat. She hadn't seen me yet, so I cleared my throat. Her eyes snapped to where I sat in the dim light of the living room. For a split second, she froze, her face registering shock. "You're home?" she stammered, her voice shaking a little. "Yeah," I said, barely keeping my voice steady. "Got back early." I watched as her mind worked, her eyes darting around, searching for a story, an excuse. But before she could even start, I cut her off. "No need to explain, Laura. I know everything." The words came out colder than I'd intended, but I didn't care. I needed her to feel the weight of what she'd done. Her face went pale. "Jake, I don't know what you think you know, but stop." My voice cracked, the anger breaking through. "I saw you with Connor at his house. You don't need to lie, Laura." She looked down, guilt and shame finally washing over her face. I could see she was scrambling, her mouth opening and closing, no words coming out. But there was nothing she could say. The truth was out, raw and ugly, and there was no taking it back. "Why?" The question hung between us, heavy and suffocating. "Why him? My best friend, someone I trusted." She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "It just happened. We didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear, Jake, it didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "You were with him, Laura. You were lying to me, sneaking around. You threw away our marriage for a fling that it didn't mean anything." Tears filled her eyes, but I felt nothing but a numb, hollow ache. I'm so sorry, Jake. I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't want to hurt you." Her words rang empty, an insult to the trust and love I'd had for her. I stood up, gathering the strength to say what I knew I had to. "Maybe you didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. You betrayed me. You and Connor. You've both shattered any respect, any loyalty that meant anything in this marriage. I deserve better than this, Laura." She took a step toward me, reaching out with desperation in her eyes. "Please, Jake, we can work through this. I'll end it with him. I'll do anything, just please don't leave me." But her words had no power anymore. They were as empty as the promises I'd built our life on, promises that meant nothing to her in the end. "No, Laura," I said, my voice finally calm. "I think it's over. For good this time." And with that, I walked out of our house, leaving her standing alone in the dark, the weight of her choices crashing down on her. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew one thing. I was done being lied to, done being betrayed. Whatever future waited for me, I'd face it without her lies and deceit hanging over me. It was time to rebuild from the ashes, leaving her and Connor as part of a past I'd never look back on again.
Oh my God. Another really good one. I really hope you enjoyed this Reddit story video. I had a great time reading this. If you want more of this kind of content, just leave a comment, let me know. Follow my channel. I'm really trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year. And we can do it. It's going to happen, guys. Thank you so much. Now, everybody have a great night and have a sweet dreams.